He is the founder of the Mormon and the Latter-day Saints at its original stage. It's way different now from what it was. Latter-day Saints now has been taken over by the disciples of Lucifer. So it's not the same as it was when it was founded by Joseph Smith. He wrote and published the Book of Mormon in 1830. That's when he wrote and published it. He was the prophet who received the vision which led him to discover the golden plates of the Nephites and the Lamanites. That's a key phrase to remember. He's a prophet who was given the authority and the vision and the direction to find these plates, and therefore he decoded them using the Urim and the Thummim to create what we now call the Book of Mormon. He was killed by a mob in 1844. Joseph Smith, if you go on Wikipedia, it will give you this information similar to what I have, but what I want to point out in here is that he's the leader and the founder of the Mormon. He wrote the Mormon Bible based on the vision that was given to him to discover the plates of the Nephites and the Lamanites. He put it together, formed the Bible, which is the Book of Mormon, the second stick. If you read about it in your modern day Bible, in Ezekiel, it tells you about the second stick, that you need the second stick to put with the first stick to get the fullness of the gospel. When he was 24 years old, Smith published the Book of Mormon. That's what I want you to get from this. Let's go into the books about Joseph Smith. The first book we'll look at is Joseph Smith, the First Mormon by Donna Hill. Chapter 7 of that book, it talks about the Book of Mormon. And on the first page of chapter 7, it mentioned most of the Book of Mormon is about the descendants of Lehi, who left Jerusalem with his family in 600 BC. Those who are familiar with the Book of Mormon know this information. What I want to point out here, it also talks about Lehi and his family built a ship and came to Central America. This book says South America as well. But no, they went to North America and Central America. That's where the Lehi, the Nephites, the Lamanites were all stationed. Yeah, there were some in South America, but they were mainly Central and North. Now, they brought plates with them. These are the plates that Joseph Smith later discovered and translated into the Book of Mormon. So that's what I want to point out here. Also, I want to, again, for the eyes of those who don't know the knowledge about the Lehi, the Nehi, the Lamanites, and Joseph Smith, I want to take away this next sentence that they put in to create more confusions around complexions, where they're saying light-skinned Nephites, dark-skinned Lamanites. They were all dark-skinned people. The Nephites, the Lamanites are all dark-skinned. Couldn't be in their right mind suggesting that the Nephites were Caucasians. Where in America, Central America and North America were Caucasian people running around before Columbus came over here. Where is that history? They weren't hiding. They were out in plain sight. So if the Nephites were Caucasians, where were they when Columbus and all the other conquistadors showed up? Where were they? So light skin, don't be fooled by this injection of light skin. They were dark skinned people, the Nephites and the Lamanites. Let's test the theory that Joseph Smith was a Caucasian person, a Gentile person. The Gentiles, when you hear the term Gentiles coming out of the Bible, it's talking about a Caucasian person. We'll talk more about that later on in this message. But let's test that theory that Joseph Smith was a Caucasian person who was driven by the words of the Most High and the Lord to go discover the plates of the Nephites and the Lamanites, and then was given the Holy Spirit and the word of the Lord to translate it using the Urim and the Thummim. Let's test it. We go into the same book that Joseph Smith wrote. And if Joseph Smith is a Caucasian person, he would have discovered this error that he needed to take out of the book before he published it. 3 Nephi 15 verse 22, and it says, and they understood me not. He's talking about the house of Israel. For they suppose it had been the Gentiles. For they understood not that the Gentiles should be converted through their teaching. If you understand what I just said, you'll realize that this is talking about someone else who's supposed to teach the Gentiles using the Book of Mormon. Another person who's not Gentile is supposed to teach the Gentile using the Book of Mormon. So let's read on some more. 3 Nephi 15 verse 23. And they understood me not, that I said they shall hear my voice. These people that didn't understand shall hear his voice. And they understood me not, that the Caucasians who came to America should not at any time hear my voice. So if the Lord is telling the Lamanites and the Nephites that at no time the Gentiles should hear his voice, except it should be through the Holy Ghost, why would now the Lord, who had said, they're not going to hear my voice, lead a Gentile, a Caucasian person all across America to go find plates and then write a book using the Urim and the Thummim, two very spiritual instruments reserved for Israel, and write that book to warn Israel, the dark-skinned melanated people, that the Gentiles were going to afflict them? Does that make any sense at all? So it's all rubbish that Joseph Smith was a Caucasian person, a Gentile. He's not. Once you know who these wordings are, who they're talking about, it's clear as day. The Gentiles shall not hear my voice. Therefore, they cannot find that plate. They cannot hear the voice to go lead them to where those plates are. Going against the same book that was written by the person who was supposed to have found that plate, if he were a Gentile. Get that garbage out of your head about Joseph Smith being a Caucasian person. He's obviously not, based on the words of the Lord, and we're going to go into more words now that man has written to confirm that. The Life of Joseph Smith, the Prophet, by George Kennan. We'll go to page 179 of that book. At the lower part of it, they're talking about this person who met Joseph Smith, and he was relating the story to another person. They met a man who called himself Elmer, and Elmer said, I am personally acquainted with Joe Smith. I heard him preach his lies, and now since he's dead, I am glad. So this man heard Joseph Smith preaching the word of the Most High, believe it was a lie, and say, oh, I'm glad he's dead. I heard Joseph Smith preach in Bainbridge, Chenango County, New York, 5 years ago, and knew him because he had such a dark complexion. I knew him because he had such a dark complexion. Eyewitness relating the story, happy as ever that Joseph Smith was killed by the Gentiles. And he made no bones about his disgust about what Joseph Smith is saying and how dark Joseph Smith was, how dark his complexion was, and he remembered him quite well. We go to another book, Images of the Prophet Joseph Smith by Davis Bitton. On page 107 of that book, the author is describing Joseph Smith by another person who saw Joseph Smith and said, Oh, Smith had dark hair and eyes, strong, rugged line face, features exactly like those of Oliver Cromwell. And you say, whoa, Oliver Cromwell is supposed to be a Caucasian person, but I've already debunked that in another message I've done. Oliver Cromwell was a black man as well, a person of color. So we're not going to stop there. He tells us, he sent us in another direction. Oliver Cromwell. Let's figure out what the feature of Oliver Cromwell was. We go to Charles I by A.E. McKilliam. That book, page 139. Cromwell entered Parliament at the beginning of the reign of King Charles, so we know it's the same Cromwell, the timeline ties. His complexion was muddy and sallow. More confusion, but we're not going to stay confused. Muddy. Anyone who knows mud, you look outside, we don't see any Caucasian mud out there. We see dark of color mud, just as the Webster Dictionary tells us. Webster 1828. The fifth meaning of muddy, dark, of the color of mud. We look for sallow, yellowish color, tinged with dark yellow. The dark skin complexion person. Cromwell was, and if you're saying Joseph Smith has the same features as Cromwell, Joseph Smith is a dark man again. Not convinced Cromwell was dark? Another book, King Charles I, a study by Walter Phelps Dodge. Page 48 of that book. Cromwell, face swollen and dark. The dark-skinned man. I've already debunked that lie that Cromwell was Caucasian in other message. Go to it if you want the fullness of that message. But I'm tying you back now. If they're saying Joseph Smith is the same features face-wise and color-wise as Oliver Cromwell, he's a dark man as well. Joseph Smith was dark complexion, a black man. Now we go to Joseph Smith's wife. Emma Smith was Joseph Smith's last wife before he was killed. We go to this book, No Man Knows My History. AAK Fellowship wrote that book. Page 29 of that book talks about Emma Smith, Joseph Smith's last wife. Joseph was at once attracted to the 21-year-old Emma, a dark, serious-faced girl. A dark, serious-faced girl. Emma, his last wife, before he was killed, was a dark woman, a black woman. Same book describes now Melissa Lott, Joseph Smith's first wife. She was among his first wives. He had many wives. Melissa Lott, Joseph's son, wrote she was with a dark complexion. First wife, dark. Last wife, dark. First wife, a black woman. Last wife, a black woman as well. We're going to go into more biblical description of Joseph because he was a person of color. And the Bible, the Book of Mormon that he wrote, was hijacked and taken away from the children, the house of Israel, and handed over to the Gentiles. And there's every effort that was made to paint a picture that Joseph Smith was a Caucasian person, because we knew not at the time what the meaning of Gentile was and still is. To help us understand, we're going to go to the sealed portion, the testament of Joseph Smith that was given to us for us to know now. The sealed portion, chapter 67, verse 84. But at the beginning of the halftime shall this prophet of the latter day, even he who was called Joseph, after the name of his father, he shall be called and shall give unto the world the fullness of my gospel. That's why I'm telling you from 3rd Nephi that he's saying the Gentiles shall not hear my voice, because he's sending the information to Joseph, who is not a Gentile. We figured that out in chapter 79 of the sealed portion, verse 63. For behold, ye who receive these things, knowest this prophet. He shall come forth in the latter day and shall be killed by the Gentiles. The Gentile is going to kill this prophet, because the prophet was part of the house of Israel, the house of Jacob, and he's of a dark-skinned complexion, and he's going to be killed by the Gentiles. But we did not know who the Gentiles were and are, so we just read it, kept moving. But we're not going to move. I'm going to spend some time and give you a reminder as to who the Gentiles are. We go to Genesis 10, verse 2 through verse 5. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, and Tubal, and Mesesh, and Tiras. Then we're going to jump to Genesis 10, verse 5. I just read Genesis 10, verse 2. Verse 5 of Genesis 10. By these, Japheth and his son were the isles of the Gentiles. They are the Gentiles. Japheth and his sons and their descendants are the Gentiles. So they belong to the Japhetites. Anytime you see Gentiles, they belong to the Japhetites, all the descendants of Japheth. Joseph Smith is of the descendants of Shem, so he cannot be Japhetite and Shemite. He's of Shem. We're not going to stop there. We know who the Gentiles are. Let's figure out their complexion. We go to the Creed of Japheth by Alexander William, page 346 and 347 of that book. Earliest Japhetans' time. What did they look like? Page 347 tells us. Blue eyes, fair complexion of their ancestors. They started out blue eyes, fair complexion. They stayed blue eyes, fair complexion. Fair complexion, the Caucasians. They are the Japhetans. Still not convinced? We go to slavery as it relates to the Negro or African race, examined in the light and circumstances, history, and the Holy Scriptures. Page 39 of that book. To the white race, the descendants of Japheth, the northern region of the earth, were given. They came from the north. Again, I have a message. Who are the Gentiles? You can take a look at that, and it will give you a full breakdown as to who the Gentiles are. I'm taking excerpts from that. But the white race, the descendants of Japheth, that's the white race. We call them the Caucasian race as well. And we already know that the Japhetites are the Gentiles. From here, Japheth, Gentiles. Come back here, Japheth, the Caucasian, the white race. We go to an abridged history, Africa and Her People by Ruthie Johnson, page 73 of that book. Last paragraph. Japheth, most likely the white one, and from him descended the Caucasian race. Japheth, the Gentiles, the white one, and from him descended the Caucasian race. Goes back, the Gentiles shall not hear my voice. The Caucasian shall not hear my voice. Said differently again, the white race shall not hear my voice. So it's telling you at no time the Japhetites, the Gentiles, the white race, the Caucasian will hear my voice to come and give you all these biblical things, these biblical scriptures. So if the white race, the Gentiles, the Japhetites weren't the one giving you that information, but it came forward by Joseph Smith. Then who is Joseph Smith? It's It's telling you clearly he's not a Japhethite. He's not a Gentile. He's not Caucasian. He's not white. So he has to be of the Shemite by process of elimination, whether by scriptures or by the words that I've covered, which clearly showed that Joseph Smith was a person of color, a black man of the tribe of Ephraim, which is of the descendants of the Shemites. We go to 1 Maccabees 3 verse 10, more indication as to who the Gentiles are. Then Apollonius gathered the Gentiles together to fight against Israel, the house of Israel, the two tribes that were left in Egypt at that time. Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, the third one, which again oftentimes doesn't get mentioned. Gentiles, Greeks, Caucasian, they were of pale skin, fair skin complexion. And they were deliberately pushing against the children of Israel, from which Joseph Smith is a descendant. And what happened to Joseph Smith happened before in Egypt, the first time we came across the Gentiles. Because this is what the Gentile did in 1 Maccabees 3 verse 48. When the Maccabeans took back over the temple, they realized the Gentiles had laid open the book of law, which is the Bible, the Holy Bible, in which the Gentiles had tried to paint the likeness of their image. They tried to whitewash the images that were in our holy books and paint over their own image. That's why Job 9 verse 24 will tell you the earth, which is America, will be handed over to the hands of the wicked, and they shall change the images of the judges, the rulers, and the prophet to their likeness, to their image. Ties back with 1 Maccabees 3 verse 48. Now they took the book of Mormon, which is the other book of law, and painted over the likeness of their image. During that time, we had no knowledge of who the Gentiles were, that they were the Caucasian, the Japhetite, so we went along with the story. But now, the story doesn't stick anymore, which brings us to the conclusion. Mormon Joseph Smith was a person of color, a black man. Emma Smith, the last wife of Joseph, was a person of color, a black woman. Melissa Lott, one of Joseph Smith's first wives, was a person of color, a black woman. Lord Protector Oliver Cromwell of England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales was a person of color, a black man. The Nephites and the Lamanites were people of color, black people that came from Egypt, which were black people to begin with, and migrated over to Central America, to North America, and remained people of color, black people that were native to America. Joseph Smith was killed by the Gentiles, the Caucasian, the white race, same as the book has told us. All the confusion debunked.